our next speaker is Zeynep, who is really the founder of the field. She was the one that in the late 5 years ago, got us all together, asked the world who had DLG4 mutations, and put it together in a seminal publication, and has carried on with sort of being the matriarch of the entire field. Plus, she's tons of fun to be with as well. So it gives me a tremendous pleasure to present Dr. Tümer, Turkish born, sort of Copenhagen-based clinician scientist who originally worked on Menkes disease, but now is really heading the field of DLG4. Could we have a handheld mic up here, as we said, for her, so she can actually stare at the slides while she talks to us and use her finger as a pointer, as she likes to do?
First of all, I just want to thank you, of course, because I'm here because of this community. And I just want to say that my research with DLG4 would not exist if I was not supported by the patient organization. Since 2021, I have been communicated with them. And it is my driving force working in DLG4 that you are here. Otherwise, I have been working with rare disorders for more than 25 years. I have a lot of disorders I'm working with, but none of them is in my heart as DLG4. Just you know that. So it's how I feel, and I can be emotional with DLG4. So it is my maternal side. And I just want to go there because I want to point to the screen, and you can see me, and I can also see my screen when I'm showing that. And this is what I want to talk about, and it's so nice that the young Alex, or Alex the junior have given the introduction to the gene and the mutations. And I want to just say how we can go from the DNA to the protein, and then I want to just tell about how we expect the variants to affect the protein of the PSC95, and I also want to go through the activities in our group, and I think time for questions will be in the end. So I just want to show kind of a bit where I'm come from, Turkey, and I have moved to Denmark in late 80s, so I'm more Danish probably than Turkish, except my movements. And I'm based in Copenhagen. It's a very small country, and this is the hospital I'm working with, is Copenhagen University Hospital, Rigshospital. And my office is somewhere here around, and we have around 150 employees in our department of genetics. And my research group is very little. It is me and Amanda, who is on maternity leave now. And in Denmark, we have the universal health system. So that means that you can have up to 1 year for maternity leave. So I hope one day it will also happen in the United States. It is really very privileged to be with your child, even though it, of course, affects the DLG4 research. But I'm very happy that it can happen, and it should be everywhere in the world. So it is only me at the moment and Amanda. But on the other hand, I have a lot of collaborators all around the world, which, of course, helps me to continue with the research. And my best company or collaborator is the foundation, DLG4 Shine Foundation. And so with that, I can just start. My story with DLG4 started in 2017, where we identified a patient with a DLG4 variant. I sometimes use the word individuals, but it's so easy to respect because I don't want to stigmatize a person calling a patient. But I'm so used to that, so I may call it a patient. So sorry for that if I do that. But I try to always use the word individual, or kids or children. So it started in 2017, as I say, we have found a patient with DLG4. When I looked in the literature, it was very we didn't know a lot of that. There were few publications, single case or 7 cases. And then, okay, we said, I want to just look at this gene and what's going on. So in 2021, so it took us really 4 years to gather 53 patients. Oops, it was wrong. Yes. 53 patients you can see here. and then make this publication. And we already started working with, collaborating with Alex, the senior, our Toastmaster, and Thomas Dye already in 2017. So it tells about the collaborations, and there are so many other. I think there were 80 people in this publication. And so it was in 2021, and now also Mara has told us in 2025 in our database, we have 235 individuals. I don't have information of everything on them, but it is a very kind of getting more common than rare. Of course, it's still rare. So, and this is the protein. I just want to say this protein has some important functional domains. It means that these domains are used to bind to other proteins in the postsynapse I will show in a second. So, how the brains and neurons and synapses and PSD95 work very shortly. So we have in our brain about 86 billion neurons. So they are connected to each other, and they are connected in what is called synapses. This is the main body of a neuron. These are the dendrites, and the dendrites talk with each other, and they make the connections which are called synapses. So we have about 1 quadrillion synapses in our brain which are functioning. And PSD95 is in the postsynaptic part. So it means that the current comes from here and then goes to the other part of the synapses. So this communication makes the connection, everything in our brain, our thinking, our imagination, our cognitive functions, and everything occurs in these synapses. So, and it is a very complex region of the brain. There are about 400 to 500 proteins working there, and you can imagine that they should really work together very well so that everything functions okay. And PSD95 has also, Alex has also said, one of the main proteins, because it is kind of, I call it kind of mother of the postsynapse, because it organizes everything. You know, it's like that with women. Luckily, there are more women here. So they organize everything. They put everything together. So this PSD95 connects both to the membrane or the part which is connected to the other side of the synapse. So these are very important proteins for epilepsy or other cognitive functions. And not only there, but it also connects to other proteins in the down part of the synapses. So it has a really very good combination connecting things together. So this is how the synapses are. And how do we, so what happens in the synapses regarding to DLG4? As Alex said, we have the gene. These genes are composed of exons, the coding parts we call it also. And this is the gene. The coding part, they come together, make the RNA, or it's called also transcription, it's kind of transcribed. And in the body of the cell, this is the nucleus of the cell. In the body of the cell, the RNA makes the protein. So if something happens here, it can affect already on this level the RNA, or it can affect the protein. So it will have different types of effects, and also it's very dependent on the mutations Alex has described. So as he has said, we have 2 copies of DLG4, which codes for 50% of the protein, PSD95, and 50% of the other. And if a mutation happens in the gene, something happens to the protein function, in this way or in that way. And as he said, this is an autosomal dominant disease because 1 copy of the gene is not enough to kind of have the normal function of the brain. If it was an autosomal recessive disease, both genes would be affected. But in DLG4, only 1 of them, 1 copy is affected. So he told about a lot of the variants and how the variants are working. And now, even though we have 235 patients in our database, we only have gene report of 203. And 167 of them are the called protein truncating variants, under which you have seen the deletions, duplications, nonsense variants, and many splice variants, which happens in the introns. And 36 of them, it means approximately 20% of all the variants are missense in our database. But the point is that how these variants on the gene affect the protein. It is very important regarding how the treatment is going to be made, because you have different treatments regarding, depending on how the protein functions afterwards. So this is what my part of the research is, to kind of help the other researchers downstream the kind of pathway, what we find, so that they can use this information in treatment options. So what happens is that, in general, we have kind of two different ways of how a gene variant can affect the function of the protein. This is called the nonsense variants. As Alex said, then the protein is kind of stops in an earlier place, earlier stage, and it leads to degradation of the protein. So you have the normal protein and only one copy of the normal protein, because the other doesn't exist, because it is degraded. This is called loss of function. And the other is gain of function, and sometimes we have this called the dominant negative effect variants. These are mainly the variants, they kind of change. For example, this is the normal domain, and it changes the domain's function, and it can turn to a gain of function. It has a new function. Or sometimes it also has a dominant negative effect on the normal on the function of the normal protein. So this is, you cannot always know when happens what, but what we know is that protein truncating variants, in most of the cases, except for they happen in the last part of the gene, they lead to loss of function, so they are not there. But when we come to missense variants, they can be both loss of function and they can be gain of function or dominant negative effect. But this is the general rule, and in genetics there are so many exceptions. So even some of the protein truncating variants may have other effects on the protein. And I'm sure it is also here exists in some of the families or kids here. But these are the general rules, and we have to understand how the protein is. It is not enough to know. Our knowledge on the gene is not enough to predict what's going on. So it needs some functional studies I will also talk about. So this is, now it is a very, thank you for Sabrina to tell about the gene report, because it is something I have been also, some families contact me directly, and it's difficult to just understand how to read the reports. The reason is that there are two main forms of the protein. So this is called, one of them is called the beta form, and the other called is alpha form. So this is, what happens is that the genes can make different types of proteins depending how the exons come together. And luckily in DLG4 there are two isoforms. Some genes may have 20 different isoforms. They function differently. So what is that? The alpha isoform is the main brain form. So this protein is mainly expressed, works in the brain. So 80% of all the PAC95 we have in our brain is alpha, but beta also exists. On the other hand, beta and alpha, they are found also in other places of the body, where especially in the synapses. And I'm also very interested, I couldn't find anything yet. There's also a synapse between the muscles and the nerves, so it should also be functioning there. And some of the phenotypes or features can be because of bad functioning of those synapses. So what happens is that these are the exons, and the exons form the proteins. And the different isoforms have these two different NM numbers. Sabrina has also showed. So this is why they have these two different numbers. I prefer using this one because if I find a variant here, then it is difficult to use this one to define this variant. So as I know this was a problem for the families, we made this chart, which is also in Shine website, where you can use this chart to read the mutations of your children. So it is there. So what we do is that, for example, if you see this C, C means the coding, C is for coding. P is protein, but it is the predicted protein because we don't sequence the protein, we sequence the gene. And it is, if it's using with this one, then you are going to see, okay, this is this NM. No, it's not that one I'm going to look at. It is this one. If it is C659, 659 is somewhere here. And if it affects somewhere in this domain, so this domain or this domain. So you can have a general idea of where the variant of your child is looking in this chart. If you have any questions, I'm very happy to, of course, answer. I'll be around tomorrow and also Saturday morning. So this is kind of a instruction, how I can see where the mutation of my child is, just looking at the gene report. When it is done, so I will just tell about the activities are in our group. There's three different activities, clinical studies, RNA studies, and functional studies. And this is mainly with collaboration, and I will go through these different activities. As I said, the clinical part is my main activity, and we have a lot of general things trying to understand the gene and the phenotype function. And we have made these different types of lists where to look at because of the needs of, again, the SHINE Foundation. For example, epilepsy was one of the most important things bothering the families. Adult phenotype is also very important because many of the kids are young and many families want to know, okay, how the progression of the disease is. Even though it's not always, you cannot translate one kid's progress to the other one, but it may give a general idea of what's going on. Deep phenotyping is very important to understand the gene and phenotype relationship, and also it can be also part of the clinical readiness studies. So it's going to help other researchers to make the natural history studies. Sleep disorder and migraine, we have not started yet, but I know that these are very important, especially sleep affects the families in different ways. And it is also very common in DLG4-related synaptopathy. And migraine is also something we are very interested in because it's very difficult to see whether, I know some families we have been talking about whether the child has a migraine or not, and whether migraine, epilepsy, and how they are linked together. So that's something also I'm very interested in working on, but it will probably be Thomas Dyer I'm going to collaborate with, and migraine is, I'm also thinking of some collaborators, clinical experts on these phenotypes. I'm just a basic clinical geneticist, so it's not I'm not a neurologist. But collaboration can solve really a lot of problems. So as you know that our study of this DLG-related synaptopathy started, and then we also made gene reviews, which is used really very much, especially in the United States, by the medical doctors to lead them how to treat the children, which type of analysis should be done, and how management should be. And again, you can see that we also have still the collaborators are also in part of the DLG community, Thomas, Senior and Junior Alexis. So this is very useful because I think you can also take this to your doctor and say, okay, this is what is recommended. I want just this to read it and see and help my child. So that's the reason why we made these gene reviews. And it's online, it's available for everybody. And our epilepsy study, I won't talk very much about the epilepsy study, but I think Thomas will talk later on that. And you can again see the same suspects, usual suspects in our collaboration in the study. Where we have done is that we have looked only, it is together with Guido Riboli, who is an epileptologist. We have looked at the data of 35 individuals and found out that this DE-SWAS, or it's also called ACES, it's, I think, which school we are working with or rely on or think are part of it. They use this different type of what's called descriptions. And it is found in about 20% of all with epilepsy. But this is only 20% of all with epilepsy. And epilepsy is around 40 to 50% of the kids. And if they have this DE-SWAS, there is a regression within verbal and or motor domains. But it is not always like that. The ones who do not have the SWAS can also have the regression. And there was no clear genotype, phenotype, how the gene mutation is, and how the epilepsy is, how the epilepsy form. There was no relation with that. And, but our conclusion was, it was also for the families to show to their neurologists that it should be explored in all the DLG4 persons with DLG4 variants, and also DLG4 should be considered in all the cases with ESS or DE-SWAS. So this was our conclusion, and it was written very clearly in our conclusion, also to be used by the families to show to their, whatever they need to show and convince. So these are two very big studies we are trying to make out. And one of them both of them I really need the family support. One of them is the deep phenotyping. We have a very large survey based on REDCap, and REDCap is a database accepted by all the countries because it's very well protected behind firewall and everything. And data is collected from the health professionals. It can be geneticists, it can be neurologists and whatever. And in this, I have knowledge about 235 entries. But only 115 of them are completed. So what I'm going to do is to just send a reminder to the doctors, but it's a big survey, so it also takes time, even though we made it very easy to fill out. So it will take time, but we hope to publish something in 2026 so that we can show how the disease is generally the phenotype of the diseases. So that's the reason why it's called deep phenotyping. And adult phenotyping is something you want to put information of all the individuals who are 16 years old or older to understand the progression of the disease. But what we did is not take a single time point. So our questions are not built on an adult or adolescent patient and say, okay, how are you now? But we want to say, you have this symptom, when did it start? You don't have this symptom, did you have this symptom, and did it disappear? So it is we try to pick the progression. And both of these surveys are also went through some of the board members of the SHINE, and they used and they have filled out, and we also made interviews, so it is it also reflects the needs of the family. So it's not only our scientific interest, it is completely based on the needs, the questions. So this is something I really want the support of the families. I know it takes time, but you can just do it in pieces. We have already 54 individuals in this survey, but it is anonymous, so I cannot go back and just can you please fill it, complete it. but only 18 are completed. And it will really be so important if you just announce it in all the, the communities, your relationships, and all the homepage to look at this. It is, and everything is described here, and you can always ask me. RNA studies, how is my time? I think I am talking too much.
You're the plenary speaker, so you carry on.
Okay. Okay, we'll be here for the next 2 hours. I take the privilege. It's like that. So the RNA studies is that this is especially the variants Alex has called, which happens in the intron. So these are the coding parts, the exons, but some of the variants are in the intron. So these are the parts which are taken out from the transcript. So they are not part of the RNA. So normally it is very difficult to predict how this mutation or variant affects the protein or the transcript. So if you have such a variant, we do the studies, and I have also received a lot of families also from the United States, where we made this RNA studies to see how the transcripts are affected, so how this is affected. Because how this is affected will tell how the protein is affected. One of them it's a bit complicated, but the thing was that this is also have been published later. But what was that? There's a mother who has contacted me, and her son had a variant in deep of the intron. So it's not near the part where it's put together in the intron, which are the main places where the variants occur, but in the middle of everything. And they didn't know whether this was the mutation, the LG4 mutation leading to the disease or not. And at that time, they didn't know that. This, if, for example, I told you this alpha isoform, some genes which are expressed or found in the brain are not expressed or found in the blood. So you have to first know if a protein in the brain or a gene in the brain can be analyzed in the blood. And at that point, they didn't know that this gene can also be analyzed in the blood, and told to family that the only way was to make a brain biopsy. And of course, you can feel how the family, it was just like so. But we found out that the expression can be checked in the blood, and we found out that this variant was really causing the disease in this child. So one copy, okay, and this made different RNA types, but all of them were leading to truncation of the protein. So it was a very classical DLG4 SHINE mutation type. And my last and probably most interesting part, but I will not talk very much about it, is the functional studies. We have 2 collaborators, one from Rotterdam, Hiske van Woerden. I'm not very good in Dutch. She does very interesting studies, and the other is Christian Strømgaard from Copenhagen University. And Kim will also talk more about this, but I will just mention what they are doing and what we are collaborating with. So this is the very new collaboration I have started, and even the board doesn't know the study, so it's also going to be very interesting. And this is my good friend and collaborator, Hiske. She's a real researcher, sharing all the information and supporting other researchers. So she's really a diamond. And what her job, or what we are trying to do, is that, especially when you have the protein truncating variants, you know more or less what the effect on the protein is. But as I said, the missense variants, they can be a gain of function or a loss of function. So that's what we want to know with these studies, functional studies. It's the main part. So she makes both in vitro studies and in vivo studies in mouse. So we only have the information of the mutation or the variant. So we don't use human cells. Here in this, she logs both whether the protein is stable in very normal cells, which are called hex cells. They are some dividing cells. And she also looks at how the neurons are formed by injecting the different mutations through viruses in the brain hippocampal neurons of the mouse. So what she here does is that she did it for PST95. It works beautifully. And what she will do is that she looks at the size of the length of the dendrites, and she counts how many synapses that are made compared to the controls. And she also sees whether the cell body of the neurons, which are called soma, they are big or small, and how they are formed. So she used a lot of good algorithms to count them. So what she's doing now is make some constructs with the different missense variants and to see how this is formed. And I will show one single example in my second next slide. And the other thing, this is much more exciting and interesting because she makes in vivo studies where she injects in utero, in utero, this is my English, in utero injection of the mutations in the embryo, so in the mouse's embryo's brain, and then with a method called electroporation, pushes these constructs into the cells which form the neurons. These are called neural progenitor cells. What happens is that, so this is the cortex of the brain, so it is a very kind of section. So what happens is that the neurons, during development, at the 14.5 stage, gravity stage of the mice embryos, so they start moving to the cortex. This is the normal procedure also in human, and they come to the cortex. So what she does is she measures how they are placed in the cortex, these neuronal progenitor cells, under neuronal development, and she also sees whether there are anything left here. So this is an empty vector which shows the normal. What she did is that she has overexpressed PST95. So this is not our model, because our model is less expression. When she overexpressed it, she can see that some of the cells remain here, so they don't migrate to the cortex. And when they migrate, they come very close to the cortex. So this tells us that the amount of PST95 in the neurodevelopment is very crucial. So we should neither have less nor more, so it should be balanced. And what we will do, it takes a lot of time. One test takes around 3 months because you have to inject in utero. Sorry for that. Some words I won't learn. It's like that. It takes time, but it is also something we want to know because it's an in vivo very important study. And Strömgård, he's a pharmacist, but what he does is he also looks both the stability of the protein, again in vitro constructs, and he also makes some small peptides and see how PST95 is bound to the different proteins, both on the membrane, but also on the cell body. And as I said, Kim will tell more about it, but I will give one example of a variant. This is not published yet, so I don't have the consent, so that's the reason why I don't show it. Variant is that, but it is in the first domain of the protein, which is called PDZ1 domain. It is the domain which also is linked and binds to the receptors on the membrane. These are the AMPA and MDA receptors, which are also leading to some epilepsy and neurodevelopmental disorders. And it also shows our hypothesis was that this mutation would then affect binding or something of the receptors. So this part is Hiskes' work, and this part is Christian Strömgård's lab's work. And here you can see that the expression, this variant, is expressed. So there's nothing there. So the protein is there. But when she put it in the, when she put it in the neurons, she didn't make the algorithms and counting yet, But it seems as if it is also expressed in the soma, and you can see it in the dendrites, but she also needs to count the exons, and she has not done that yet, because it takes also a lot of time to make the data analysis. But this tells that the protein is not degraded, so it is there. So it means that it has the function has changed. But how the function has changed, this is a gain or loss of function, but something changed, but the protein is there. So then the study by Strömgård's lab, it also tells how different studies can support each other. Tells that binding of this is the wild type, the normal type, and this is the R mutation, and the binding has been completely stopped. So this is binding of the PDZ1 to the NMDA receptor. So this is not there, it is abolished. And also the protein is not stable. So it means that it is kind of the protein, this missense variant has lost its function of binding. So this is a way we could show that this should be a loss of function variant. So this is what we want to do for all the missense variants, one by one. All of them we know. And I will, of course, be very happy to, if you have such a variant, I will also remember to put it in, but I want to do all of them, so not a single one. So the important point is that all the research projects are complementary. This is my last slide. And everything will help us to understand better what's going on. And we predict that most of the protein truncating variants are loss of function, and it's likely that they will behave more or less in the same way. As I say, genetics is there are always exceptions to the rules. We don't know how the missense variants will behave, but my personal idea is most of them will lead to, again, loss of function. But we have to look at that. Some of them may lead to gain of function. This is the reason, I think, because the receptor proteins can be loss or gain of function, but this protein is so important that when you don't have it, it's kind of, as I say, the mother of the house, and it should be there. So I think that's the reason why I think that my hypothesis is that most of them will be loss of function. And function studies are cumbersome, time consuming. All of also the other research projects you are going to hear about, they take time, they take money, you have to repeat and do things. And it is so important to collaborate, and this is all what I would say, both the researchers and the families with us together. And with this, I will say, genetics can be complicated. You can always call me. I'm here, ask me questions. You can always write to me, and I will always be happy to